Thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Mondays at the Beinecke. My name is Robin Dougherty. I am the librarian for Middle East Studies at Yale University Library. I've been a professional librarian for over 30 years, and I've been here at Yale for about 13 of those years, so nearly half my career now has been spent at Yale. And I'm delighted to have been invited by the Mondays at the Beinecke team to give my perspective on collecting for the library at the heart of the university. And of course, I'm going to focus on the collection of Islamic manuscripts that is a small, tiny fraction of which is on view right now in the public galleries at the Beinecke until the 10th of August. As Michael would say, without further ado, I will carry on. So, of course, I think a lot of people who are present on this call have some notion of this mythical foundational myth of Yale College. Um, our collection of books is at the heart of our founding mythology at this institution. When you walk into the nave of Sterling Memorial Library, you can see this bas-relief if you walk in. It's in the upper left as you come in. This depiction of that myth showing how in 1701, a group of 10 ministers gathered in a house in Branford, Connecticut, and established what was at that time called the Collegiate School, with a ceremonial gift of books, each stating as he came forward with his gift, "I give these books for the founding of a college in this colony." Most of you know the story. The college moved to New Haven in 1716, and its book collection, most of it, went with it and continued to grow. In 1743, the Yale president of that time, Thomas Clapp, published a catalog of its holdings, and the total was about 2,600 volumes. You can view what remains of this 1743 collection, as we call it, 1742, sorry, collection, as we call it, in the lower level of the Beinecke in the south and west windows. It's all arranged so you can see it. I examined this published catalog from 1743 because I was curious to find out, did it list any items related to Arabic or to the broader Eastern Mediterranean, Western Asia part of the world? And in this catalog, I found two titles specifically about language, listing Simon Ockley's Introductio ad Linguas Orientales, in other words, Introduction to Oriental Languages, and another title on the Armenian language, which means that in 1743, Yale College students had access to grammar books and bibliographies on the study of what were then known as Oriental languages. So this term in the 19th century, I need to define it. It referred to, I mean, quite literally, non-Western languages. So any language that was not French, German, Italian, Spanish, Latin, Greek was included in this category Oriental, and that means that Hebrew was included in this category of Oriental languages, as well as Arabic, Persian, Sanskrit, Turkish, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, a host of the world's languages were all folded together under this one term. This book that I've circled in the catalog, The Introduction to Oriental Languages, was written by a British Orientalist named Simon Ockley, who had been professor of Arabic at Cambridge since 1711. In his introduction to this book, he urged the importance of a knowledge of Oriental literature to the proper study of theology. Therefore, it is not surprising that his introductio includes a fairly extended excerpt from the 10th surah of the Qur'an, which is part of which is the story of Pharaoh chasing the children of Israel across the Red Sea. So that's the part that you see in Arabic text right there and then translated into Latin underneath. Yale College students of 1743 almost certainly could not read this extract as it was published in Arabic, but at least they would have known from this publication that there was this language and that there was this text. The book also includes a 50-page survey of the characteristics of the Arabic language. It's not a grammar. It's not meant for you to learn Arabic from this book. It's simply describing these are the characteristics of the Arabic language. And it also included a very helpful bibliography of important European works about the Arabic language and a list of important Arabic-speaking authors. So in a little handbook, you had a way to get into the study of Arabic if you were a student at Yale in 1743. Now, a little bit more about the early state of knowledge and instruction of Arabic at Yale and in the United States. There's a much bigger story here, and I'll only tell this one little piece. On the right is the portrait of Ezra Stiles, very famous portrait in the Yale University Art Gallery. Stiles is, of course, the 7th president of Yale College in the late 18th century, who not only read Hebrew well, but he was also self-taught in Arabic. When he took on the presidency of Yale in 1778, he conveyed his welcoming attitude to the study of non-Western languages in his inaugural address. In this address, he summarized all the fields of knowledge and the importance of their study in forming a well-rounded and most emphatically Christian graduate. After the English language, which of course must be perfected, according to Stiles, he lists Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, the learned languages, as the necessary objects of diligent study, and that their literatures should not be studied in translation. They needed to be studied in the original language. The Greek language is of supreme, as in Stiles' words, of supreme importance for the entire Christian faith. And for the same reason, he said, the study of Hebrew must be fostered. And he went on, he says, it were easy for me, gentlemen, to go on at length in praise of this sublime and beautiful language, caught up in its loftiness and majesty, captivated by its sweet and sonorous harmonies. And then Stiles goes on to explore the beauties of the Syriac language. And he says, the Syriac New Testament is a text which carries a great weight, with me at any rate, weight equal to that of the Greek Testament. But then what he goes on to say is worth quoting in full. So be patient. This is important. There exists another language in which virtually the whole literature of the Orient is preserved, to wit, Arabic, worth studying in the event that the incredible multitude of manuscripts composed in it should appear in printed form, whence we would have access to the abundant cultures of Arabia, Egypt, India, Persia, and the other Eastern lands. If it is worthwhile to know 2 languages that have fallen out of general use for the sake of reading 100 or so volumes devoted to the affairs of 2 peoples, so he's talking about Greek and Latin, obviously, the number of works surviving from Athens and Rome is no larger than this, how much more useful and desirable it is, through knowledge of a single language, Arabic, to be able to bring together and enjoy the fruits of the labors of innumerable learned men. Rich and full stores of knowledge lie as yet concealed from European eyes in treatises composed in Arabic. Our own age and the recent past have failed to surpass antiquity, and more especially Eastern antiquity, in any matter pertaining to the humane studies. So in other words, Stiles was a fan of studying Arabic. In 1778, Yale was not teaching Arabic. The person who is chiefly responsible for planting the seed of Yale's Arabic language library collections was this gentleman, Edward Elbridge Salisbury. Salisbury came to Yale in 1828 at the age of 14, which was typical. Yale College at that time was more of a high school than a university. After completing his 4 years at Yale, he went on to Yale's theological school. He was ordained as a minister in early 1836. But although his Christian convictions were sincere and are evident in his journals and his correspondence, it seems that he didn't feel the vocation, he didn't feel the call to devote himself to ministry. Family members and Yale mentors suggested that he turn his intellectual talents and energy to advanced university study in Europe. He had to leave the continental United States in order to pursue advanced university study because there were no advanced university degrees awarded in any American institution at that time. After completing his theological degree at Yale in 1836, Salisbury went off to Europe, and along the way, he resolved to study Oriental languages. This literally came to him like a bolt out of the sky. In one of his diary entries, it's like he wakes up one morning and says, I have decided I'm going to learn Arabic. So he started in Paris, studying with one of the era's great Orientalist scholars, the Baron Silvestre de Sacy, who's the gentleman you see in the middle here. Now, when Salisbury returned to America in the summer of 1839, he brought with him a treasure trove of books, chiefly in Sanskrit, but also Arabic, and an advanced European education in non-Western languages that no other person in the country had. Soon after, in 1841, was realized the consummation of an idea that he had conceived during his travels. The Yale Corporation appointed him professor of the Arabic and Sanskrit languages. This is considered the first university appointment in the United States, nay, even this hemisphere, for Orientalist subjects. When de Sacy died, so just go back for 1 second. So de Sacy is the French scholar in the middle of this slide. De Sacy died quite suddenly in 1838, and he left behind an enormous personal collection of books and manuscripts related to the study of the ancient and contemporary non-Western world, including many thousands of manuscripts in many different languages of Middle Eastern countries. It took 5 years to catalog de Sacy's library, and the great auction of its contents began in 1843. And during this auction, the manuscripts were sold. So you're looking at a page from our collection of our copy, or one of our copies of the auction catalog from this huge 5-year-long auction. Salisbury worked with several French booksellers to purchase about 63 of de Sacy's manuscripts, many of which retain evidence of having once belonged to de Sacy. They still have his bookplate in them. When Salisbury returned to New Haven in 1843, after his second sojourn in Europe, his personal collection of books related to Arabic, Sanskrit, Pali, Persian, and the literatures and civilizations of those languages was as unique in the United States as was his own professorship. The entire collection was made available to potential students in Salisbury's house, which is now demolished on Church Street. That was in the slide about 2 back. So here are some examples of some of the manuscripts that came to Yale in 1870 when he donated his entire collection to the library. About 100, a little bit over 100 manuscripts, mostly Arabic, some Persian, and some in Turkish. And so all 3 of these are actually on display in the exhibit right now. So you can come visit and you can come see it. Now, after the 1870 donation of Salisbury's library, we have further additions to the library's collections in these kinds of languages and this kind of material. So in 1903, Yale professor of Semitics, Charles Torrey, wrote that up to 1900, Yale could boast of the Arabic manuscripts acquired by the late Professor Salisbury. It was a worthy beginning, and no libraries in the land were better off. And that was true. We had the largest collection of Arabic manuscripts for about 30 years until Princeton bought more. So in 1900, an opportunity to build on Salisbury's collection came when the collection of Carlo Landberg came onto the market in Germany. So Landberg is the gentleman in the middle of this slide. Torrey, the Yale professor of Semitics, is on the left, and so Landberg is a Swedish Orientalist scholar who is particularly known for his scholarship on dialects of the Arabian Peninsula. Landberg is a story all to himself. He is quite a character. I will save his full story for another day. But similarly to Salisbury, Landberg was wealthy enough to direct the course of his own life. He had spent decades living in Arabic-speaking countries, recording these local dialects. Shortly after his 75th birthday, he put a collection of some 800 items on sale in Germany, where it was purchased by the American banker and philanthropist Morris Ketchum, who's on the right of my slide, Morris Ketchum Jessup, and then it was gifted to Yale by Jessup. And in 1911, the magisterial 11th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica highlighted the Salisbury and Landberg collections as among Yale Library's special treasures. So 2 examples there on the slide from both the Salisbury and the Landberg collection. From the Landberg collection, we have a few more examples. This item is in the exhibit. This is among my favorite items that I like to talk about. It is a manuscript from Yemen. It is a late 19th century manuscript, so it's relatively recently made. However, the text itself is much older, which is quite common. It's very important to remember that manuscript culture in Middle Eastern countries was very long-lived. So although you probably are aware that Gutenberg, he produced his first publications in the middle of the 15th century, and we have our Gutenberg Bible on display. Print was not widely used in Middle Eastern countries really until the 19th century, and manuscript culture persisted very strong, producing hundreds and thousands of copies of manuscripts that were dispersed and distributed all over that part of the world, for a long time. So this is a Yemeni manuscript, which is actually an encyclopedia. And let's see, I believe my next slide, yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle. I'm going to go backwards for one sec. If you look at the slide on the left, you see a text, and you notice that it's in black and red. When you look a little bit more closely, you realize that what's going on here is this is one text containing 5 separate texts. I don't know of any examples in any other languages. If anyone does know, I would love to know what it might be, of a text that basically embodies 5 completely independent texts, completely interwoven within the text of a main text. So there's the main text going this way. There's one text, which is the first letter of every line, like an acrostic, which you've probably heard of. But then the second column of words, that's another text. The third column of words is another text, and then the last letter of every line is a 5th text, covering Islamic law, the rules of writing poetry, the rules of rhyme in poetry, the history of Yemen, and Arabic grammar, 5 in 1 in this wonderful book that we got from the Landberg collection. Next to be added to Yale's collections of Islamic manuscripts was what we call, for convenience, the Wellcome Krauss collection. This is about 520 items that were purchased in 1949. They were purchased. Krauss is a very well-known book dealer in New York City. We have many materials that either were purchased from Krauss or that he gave us eventually. But in 1949, approximately 520 items came in from this collection. Well, they weren't really a collection. It's more of an auction lot that was put together by the bookseller from material deaccessioned from uncatalogued materials that had been acquired originally for the Wellcome Trust in London. And that's another whole talk. I could talk about that. I've got a lot more I could say about it, but Wellcome was an American entrepreneur, made his money in pharmaceuticals, became a collector, as often happens with these rich fellows, and sent buyers around the world to purchase things for his proposed Museum of Mankind. He basically tried to collect the entire world somehow. And when he died, his trustees said, we can't keep all of this stuff. And they had a huge deaccessioning where material was basically redistributed, mostly for free, to other educations, libraries and museums, mostly in the UK, but some material ended up in the US, like the Wellcome Krauss. These are 2 examples that you can see in the exhibit. I imagine that the Krauss, well, actually, I've seen photographs of the Krauss libraries. This is from the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Well, the Wellcome warehouses looked exactly like this. They were piles and piles of unopened wooden crates. So this material was redistributed once it was all extracted from various parts of the world, and we got some of it. Now, another addition to the collection came between 1959 and 1972 in kind of small groups, with a large group of materials coming in 1972 from a gentleman named Oscar Rescher. Now, Rescher is also a very interesting person who deserves a whole talk all by himself. He was born in Germany, but in 1928, he made Istanbul his permanent home. He converted to Islam and held a number of academic posts at various libraries and universities in Turkey. I mean, basically in the 30s, he realized that he could not go back to Germany. He was a Jewish man, and he saw what was happening in Germany in the 30s, and he decided he liked living in Istanbul. He spoke Turkish. He had many friends, and he stayed, and he converted to Islam. He was said to have lived in a house overlooking the Bosporus that he shared with many cats, which is why there's a cat there. His, let's see, uh, Yale purchased items from his collection on a piecemeal basis throughout the 60s. And in 1972, after he died, the Beinecke purchased a group of over 200 items. So these were described by my predecessor, Leon Nimoy, in the Yale University Library Gazette as not a dealer's, but a scholar's collection, assembled during half a century of continuous residence in a major Muslim state. It was brought together not with a view toward eventual profitable sale, but with a scholar's expert knowledge of the field. Leon Nimoy, my predecessor from quite a few generations of librarians back, he noted that the relative difficulty at the time for any, he noted that it was difficult at that time for any Western library to build collections in Near Eastern manuscripts. And of course, it's difficult to continue doing this. Uh, One has to watch out for issues like sales from the black market, things that might have been stolen from other collections. What Rescher was selling was material that he was basically acting as an agent for mostly Turkish people living in Istanbul who were basically deaccessioning their own personal libraries. And so that's how he came to be involved in the manuscript trade. And then this is an example from the Rescher, the group of materials that we got from Oscar Rescher, a beautiful Sufi manuscript that is also in the exhibit. And some other examples. And I stole these from Özgen. Özgen, if you're out there, I know these are yours. Examples of Turkish manuscripts that we got from Özgen, from Oscar Rescher in this acquisition. Okay, the last major acquisition, I'm talking about these sort of 5 large acquisitions. Yale also acquired manuscripts throughout this period, sometimes 1 or 2 at a time, or maybe 10 or 12 at a time, from gifts or from other purchases in other ways. But these 5 acquisitions that I'm describing for you are the principal sources for the collection as it is today. The bulk of the collection comes from these 5 sources. This is the last major acquisition, and it was large indeed. In 2005, the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library purchased the Islamic Manuscript Collection of the Hartford Seminary. This collection had been built up by Duncan Black MacDonald there on the left. MacDonald was an American Scottish Orientalist and professor of Semitic languages at the Hartford Seminary. He was an expert in the Arabian Nights, and he helped to make the Hartford Seminary a center for Arabic studies in the early 20th century. The Hartford collection was built through additions from faculty and Congregationalist missionaries traveling abroad. MacDonald also had the assistance of the Armenian emigre and faculty member Madiros Harutian Ananikian, who was assistant librarian at the seminary from 1905 to 1914. With the support of a wealthy benefactor, Ananikian traveled to Cairo and Damascus, where he collected many items for the Hartford Seminary between about 1918 and his untimely and sudden death in Damascus in 1924. And through other purchases and gifts, this collection grew to some 2,000 items, which were purchased for Yale in 2005. So when we acquired this particular group of materials, that ensured that Yale would be in the 3rd place, the 3rd largest collection of Islamic manuscripts in the United States. Now, I don't see any problem with saying we're number 3, because up until just a couple years ago, when we finally had a count of the manuscripts, we didn't even know that. We had no very good idea exactly how many manuscripts were in this collection. And I think we are the 3rd largest, and we are probably the oldest amongst the oldest collections in the United States. The Hartford Seminary collection is noteworthy for its theological manuscripts and its beautifully illuminated Qur'ans like this one. This one is on display in the exhibit. It is completely covered in gold, gleaming beautifully in the light. And then other items from the sacred to the profane. This rather infamous text, Shams al-Ma'arif, is a grimoire or a collection of magical spells. If you can read Arabic, please do not read anything out loud. I am not responsible for what could happen if you do. So let's see, our collection of Islamic manuscripts. Oh, this is the installation of the exhibit. On the left, you see the selection cart, and on the lower left, you see us like experimenting with how to arrange things in the case. And in the right, you see it actually going into the case with one of our helpful staff members who helped, who basically are responsible for creating the exhibit that you see when you visit us. And here's the 3 co-curators. You will hear from my 2 co-curators, Özgen Felek on the right. She will be giving hers, I think, in a couple weeks at the end of March. And Agnieszka Retz is giving her talk at the end of April. And Michael will tell you more about that later. And with that, I will say thank you.